I'm Jake Barton from Local Projects. We're media designers, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the age of discovery. Because I feel like that's where we are today as storytellers. When you think about the age of discovery, it conjures up these images of people going on these massive boats and ships and making their way across the globe, or trekking their way across little desert spaces with divining rods looking for water. And of course, you have this sort of fantasy about solo individuals moving across the world to find new ways of telling stories, and that's what all of us are doing. That's what we're doing here today, and that's what I think we're doing within our careers. But of course, there are a couple of core aspects of storytelling that all of us know and need to keep in mind. But even within this age of change and evolution, there are opportunities for people to actually connect. So even the loneliest person is actually, well, I found this on the Upper West Side. This is like the original homemade transmedia project. So even for that, people are able to connect one with the other. And I think that's actually the core of today's discovery. My company, Local Projects, did the original interaction design for StoryCorps, almost a decade old now, where people go into these soundproof booths and interview each other, and you leave with a copy of the interview, and a copy goes into the Library of Congress. So it's a way to make a large national oral histories project one conversation at a time. And all of our projects involve different people and different connections. So this is a project that we did for GE around healthy imagination, where we developed this media sculpture that we are projecting different stories about how our healthy worlds change and evolve our lives. And who would have imagined that something like this would be possible? We did this for the National Museum of American Jewish History, where we're actually projecting on these two parentheses that face each other. So a lot of our work has to do with physical space, with interior architecture, with storytelling, with making connections one to the next. And the project in particular that I want to talk to you about today is the work that we've done for the 9/11 Memorial and 9/11 Memorial Museum. So we got involved 7 years ago, actually. And we were half of the original exhibition design team doing the master plan for the museum itself. And in the course of that, we also got involved with the memorial. And I think it's an important case study because it really talks specifically about audience and about community, which of course, at least in my mind, is at the heart of storytelling today. Who is the audience? Who's the community that you're serving? So the first piece I'm going to talk about is our work for the memorial. I don't know if you're aware of this. And for those of you who are out of town, there are tickets available, and you should go ahead and go and see the memorial. It's really an incredible space. The names on the memorial themselves are arranged in this incredibly unorthodox way. They're not alphabetical. They're not chronological. They're actually arranged by what's called meaningful adjacencies. And so what that means is that the foundation actually went out to all of the family members and asked them what name they would like next to the name of their loved one. So this is an incredible, epic process where the almost 3,000 next of kin were able to give this type of information, and then we were tasked with the really massive challenge of actually developing an algorithm that we used to mathematically arrange or suggest an original arrangement for the names themselves. And so what this really points to is the power of this moment to allow something like these bronze panels to actually reflect and to tell the stories of each individual name itself. So what you're looking at here are different groups, and they're groups based on the different flights or locations, and then there are subgroups based on different places where people worked. And then within that, you see these green lines that are connecting one to the next, and those are these individual relationships that were requested by each next of kin. And so then we built this piece of software that actually unpacks all of those relationships. And so there's 8 major groupings, one to the next, and then you can actually search not just for an individual name, but also for groups. So you can search by a nationality, you can search by a place of work or occupation. And all of these stories are then actually embedded and actually come to life from the bronze panels themselves. So it's a way to take something as incredibly abstract as a memorial and actually have all of those human relationships embedded deep within it. This is one example of those meaningful adjacencies. So this is a family of 3 that all don't have the same last name. And through this arrangement, they were able to actually be put one next to the other. And the thing that's really incredible about this in particular is that you can go to the memorial itself, And by using your smartphone, you can actually get access to all of those different stories, as well as oral histories from each of those individuals. So suddenly this experience, which can be reflective and abstract, can also become incredibly concrete and can be rooted deeply in storytelling itself. Now, when we started the museum process, we had an opportunity to actually think about how to actually build a community around the museum itself. And so on the 8th anniversary, we launched this project, Make History. And this is really unusual for a museum to actually reach outside of itself in advance of the launch of the museum itself. But in this case, we were able to talk to the museum about the different ways in which some of the liabilities would be offset by actually growing a collection in advance of launching the museum itself. And so what we did was a worldwide call for experiences around 9/11 itself, and we created this double vision between the past and the present, where we would take these images from the day itself and overlap it onto Google Street View. And if anybody knows that, Google Street View is constantly updating into the present. So in a way, it's this dynamic memorial or exhibition that talks about where we were and where we are today. And that background is constantly updating. So even today, you see some of the construction starting to fade away. And eventually, when the memorial is finished, when Tower 1 is completed and all the construction is faded away, you'll still have these images overlapping onto something that actually may or may not really reflect that world of construction and of change. And that was very, very self-conscious to basically figure out how to make a custom storytelling platform that our audience could start to fill in with. I think that's what's really important, is to find something compelling, find something meaningful, find something inspirational for people to actually add their own stories into. We also built this story booth, and it's the simplest booth that we've ever built, where you basically go into the booth, you locate yourself in a physical location, you tell your own story. It's in 6 different languages, but you can speak in any language that's native. And that individual story then becomes the core of the museum itself. So the museum opens next year, and the first voice that you hear inside of the museum will be other visitors. So this is also really interesting, where instead of thinking about the museum as a place where you have a curator who's going to tell you a story, you think about the museum as a platform, as a space for you to connect with other people, to hear their stories. And this was actually both something conceptual and inspirational that we came up with in response to the brief, but it's also very strategic, because when you think about a project like this, on the far ends of the spectrum, there's really 2 extreme groups. There's survivors. There's people who literally ran out of the burning buildings on that day, who would honestly know more about the event than any curator ever could, and literally lived and made history on that day. Right? And these people are still alive and are going to be at the museum. And then there are 15-year-olds who were 4 at the time of the event, literally know nothing about it, who are arriving at the museum completely cold, and who are there to just hear what happened completely outside of themselves. So how do you make an experience that can speak with any authenticity, any legitimacy to these 2 different groups? And our answer was, take the stories, the experiences, the lived history from one, and use it to educate the other. And so the entire museum is filled with these types of feedback loops, if you will. This is actually the opening gallery, which we call We Remember, and it's meant to really reflect back the experiences of so many people who lived through that day. I'll play you a quick clip.
I was in Korea.
I was in Kiev, Ukraine.
University in Paris.
I was at Rutgers in New Brunswick.
And they said that one of the World Trade Towers just exploded.
There was a caption on the bottom of the screen.
We were watching it in real time. We actually saw it live.
And so as you make your way through the actual museum experience, again and again we have these media experiences like this chamber, which is filled with oral histories from people who survived the towers, which is also a really interesting storytelling challenge, because there's almost no visual material that was captured from that day. There's a few scant photos. There's certainly no footage from up inside the towers themselves. So we're actually using these oral histories to actually immerse people inside of that experience. Where we do have footage, for example, this is one of the final galleries where we're actually projecting directly onto artifacts themselves. And we actually worked with the museum with this idea of basically lifting out the memories of the footage by actually embedding it onto the steel itself. So this is a trident, as it's called. It's part of the original building, and we're going to be projecting all of these images of the recovery onto the trident itself. But it doesn't even need to wait for the museum. We actually have this storytelling platform built right now through a mobile application, Explore 9/11. And so as people are making their way around the site, or even at the memorial itself, they can see all of these different images that were donated by all these people who made history on that day. I'm just going to walk you through a couple of images here. This is a piece of landing gear from Flight 11. This is a shot that we knew existed but didn't get until we launched the project. This is a flight being grounded at LaGuardia Airport. This is an artifact that we're going to use in the museum that we had images of on site, but we didn't have this picture at Staten Island until a New Jersey National Guard soldier updated it, or uploaded it with 60 other images of his experience. And this is probably the most powerful example of the community that was built. This is an image that I took note of during the actual launch itself, because it's so powerful. You can see the firefighter making their way through the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. You can see the fire truck that's stuck in traffic, right? And you can feel the urgency. And of course, people who know that there's a good 1.5 miles for that firefighter to run just to be on site. We got an email to the general information box asking to get in touch with the photographer. And as I read further, I saw that it was actually the father of that firefighter who was asking to get in touch with him specifically to thank him, because as he knew it, this was literally the last image that was taken of his son from that day. And so to understand the power of making a platform, of connecting that type of a community, it really led us to this.
I knew that everything had changed.
I was terrified. I was scared. I will never, ever forget that day.
Everyone in the free world lost something on that day.
9/11 was not just a New York experience.
It is something that we shared, and it's something that united us.
And I knew when I saw that people who were there that day, who immediately went to help people known and unknown to them, was something that would pull us through.
All the outpouring of affection and emotion that came from our country was something really that will forever, ever stay with me.
Still today, I pray and think about those who lost their lives and those who gave their lives to help others. But I'm also reminded of the fabric of this country, the love, the compassion, the strength, and I watched the nation come together in the middle of a terrible tragedy.
And so I encourage all of us to find our community, serve the story, and most of all, don't go it alone. Thank you very much.